Hello everybody, it's Wyvern here with another bit of Total War Warhammer 2 Quick Match gameplay. This time around, it's going to be a bit of a double cast. Both games as Empire with a new strat I've been using against Dark Elves because I mostly want to just get this out there and kind of share it. I actually kind of came across the strategy quite by chance in a match where I was sort of not paying attention and my opponent was basically instantly ready and I wasn't sure what to run. So regardless, for those of you who don't know, in my opinion, the Dark Elf matchup is one of the worst for Empire currently. I think it's actually one of the toughest for Empire. I think it's the toughest for several factions. One of the big problems being, of course, that Dark Elves are probably one of the most flexible factions in the game right now. There's a lot of different strategies they can potentially run, all of which are pretty effective. They can go very wide. They can go very narrow with elite units like Sisters of Slaughter. They can go with physical resistance heavy units like such as the Gunpowder Warlocks. They can bring a plethora of different monsters. They can go very elite with their infantry. They can go with dragons. They can bring shooting heavy comps with a horde of dark shards. They've got a whole variety of different lords, all of whom function in different ways. You've got, of course, good old Hellabroken. You've got Malekith. You've got Marathi. Even the two basic lords and the sorceress lords. All of them are very competitive lord picks. So it's a really tough matchup, I think, for Empire because what kind of build can be flexible enough to deal with all types of enemy builds? Their even cold one night spam is kind of a common thing, and if Empire isn't prepared for that, you're kind of screwed. So regardless, I did have a comp here. This first game, well, this was actually the first game I brought it, and it was quite by accident. My opponent readied up almost immediately. I was actually not ready to start, and so I didn't have a comp ready to go. Hadn't really thought it through, and so I kind of put something together. You can see Volkmar here actually does not have his Jade Griffin. He does still have Divine Power, which is improved Mince cast chance. So this is not really a comp I would recommend, but I was kind of desperate, just threw something together. But for the rest of the comp, I decided to go with a Bright Wizard. I think he's a pretty good choice in this matchup. He does provide fire damage with Flaming Sword of Ruin. He does, as well as magical damage, which is great for bypassing the physical resist on both Sisters of Slaughter as well as Doomfire Warlocks. He also does have Burning Bolts, which is great against heavily armored infantry, which of course Dark Elves can bring a lot of, and of course cavalry as well if you can get them to stay still. Burning Head, great for incinerating low armor troops, and then Cascading Fire Cloak just to help you hold a little longer. Also, what's cool about Flaming Sword of Ruin is that it does apply to both shooting as well as melee, so depending on what your situation calls for, you can use the Flaming Sword. Overcasted, it lasts twice as long, 38 seconds is more than enough usually to mop up a Dark Elf unit. I also did bring a Light Wizard, so doubling up on casters, who was just coming out with Net of Mintok in case needed. As you can see, I also do have Power Stone as well as Blast on this guy. This was a very ad hoc build, so some of the things here are things that now change up and don't quite run, and you'll see that in the next replay actually. But regardless, my front line completely unbreakable. You can see three Flagellants, Sigmar's Sons, as well as the Tattersouls. They are backed by 2 units of Spearmen with shields in the backline, providing essentially cone of protection for my units of handguns, which were really the core of this army. 4 handguns, as well as the Silver Bullets. The Silver Bullets, of course, do have innate magic damage, which is very nice and kind of convenient. But with this many handguns, especially against, say, Hellebron, who of course has monstrous magic resistance on her Cauldron of Blood. With this many handguns, you'll kind of overwhelm her. You don't have to cast Flaming Sword of Ruin, it gives you that option. And with this many handguns, you can overwhelm her and knock her out incredibly quickly. She's a 3,000 point investment on her Cauldron, so you can get a very cost-efficient, quick assassination like that. Finally, with Outriders Grenade Launchers here, these guys are actually, I think, a decent sort of support tool here. If your opponent brings a whole bunch of Sisters of Slaughter, you can actually nuke them with grenades, especially with fire damage boosts from the Bright Wizard. So I figured, we've got a build here that can kind of shut down everything. Now for my opponent here, a little bit of an odd build. I wouldn't really, this isn't necessarily the Dark Elf build I would bring against Empire. Very elite infantry. He did bring a Dreadlord with Sword and Crossbow, who does have his volley of dark arrows. He's also got Foe Seeker and Loose, which is kind of wasted here. It boosts him and it'll boost the Canine Assassin, but he's got no other shooting. This almost looked like an auto-generated army, to be quite frank, and I'm not entirely sure if it was. But my opponent here did go very heavy with elite infantry. Black Card of Nagaron, the Blaze of the Blood Queen, Hargoneth Executioners, some Spears, Sisters of Slaughter on the flank, and then out in the far distance he's got Dark Riders of the Peter Crossbows, as well as some Doomfire Warlocks. And of course the centerpiece of this army is a War Hydra with its breath attacks, as well as its crazy regen, and a Canine Assassin back here, who's actually, this actually makes me think this wasn't, because I do believe you have to actually intentionally choose some of these items. Maybe not. This might have been a random generated army. Regardless, my opponent here does have Assassin's Trophy. He's got Black Lotus and Dark Venom, so a very solid selection. Plus, any damage he does on Volkmar is permanent because I don't have Lore of Life and I forgot to put Jade Griffin on him. Volkmar actually, another reason to bring Volkmar here is that he does do fire and magic damage. So once again, that, although it's terrible against, say, Hellebron, it's actually going to be pretty monstrous against something like, say, Slanish's Harvesters or Doomfire Warlocks. Regardless, you can see what I'm doing. Rather than my decision was that you can see this lip here, and I wanted my opponent to crest this lip so that my handguns could get a nice arc of fire. I didn't want my troops to be over here because then my handguns would be blocked from firing against everything except the Hydra. So you can see I've actually positioned right just shy of the lip here, so when my opponent's troops crest, they will be in the perfect arc for my handguns. Regardless, my opponent is pushing in. He doesn't really have much of a choice. Honestly, if he'd stayed tight over there, I would have probably pushed into him. But you can see immediately the Hydra here cresting the ridge and taking volley after volley of fire. Now, granted, it's got 35% resistance to missile fire. But you can see it's already taking some monstrous amounts of work, and we are casting a Overcast Flaming Sword of Ruin, and you can see just how much damage these guys are doing. It's being hit by Kindle Flame right now, so on top of its regen weakness, it's also got 22% weak. It's got a total of 47% weakness to fire currently between Kindle Flame and that, so it's just taking some monstrous beating from that crossfire, especially from these two handguns that are currently buffed. You can see it's healing procs there, but it's really not going to save it here as the War Hydra completely collapses. It's of course not able to pile through the Sigmar Suns, and it just completely collapses. And you can see the grenades here exploding around it, destroying these Dread Spears. And my opponent, although he's able to kind of pile through, flank around, he's going to lose this War Hydra pretty decisively, and his two heroes are not being involved because they, of course, are not really in good shape. And you can see the Hydra's already dead, and things are looking pretty good. On the flanks, my opponent does manage to swing around with the Doomfire Warlocks and his Dark Riders, so I've actually pulled the Flagellants back and the Spearmen back to try to defend. And in the meantime, you can see the Tattersouls pulling in. A net goes down on the black card, which is going to reduce the amount of interference my opponent gets in here. And my handguns can simply pull back. You can see the spears plugging the gaps. My opponent getting snagged up here. And honestly, against the Dread Spears, Sisters of Slaughter probably won't even trade that well against the Flagellants, to be honest, in a straight-up fight. They might, but I kind of doubt it. And you can see here, these Blades of Blood Queen in for a terrible day as they're getting cross-fired by all these handguns. You can see 1, 2, 3, all four units of handguns, or all 5 units of handguns here, just unloading on one unit. And my opponent does get into my Outriders with grenade launchers, so good play there, but these Doomfire Warlocks can't stay in here. They're getting pounded from all flanks. He's using some dark arrows or Dark Riders with I can't even talk. Dark Riders with repeater crossbows here to whittle down my troops, but these guys are disposable chaff. It doesn't really matter. And you can see the Doomfire Warlocks having a horrible day. Volkmar is plowing along with his Grand Shield of Faith and Grand Hammer of Sigmar as these Blades of the Blood Queen completely disintegrate. Now, my opponent here does lose track a little bit of his micro. You can see he dove his assassin on the Bright Wizard, doing some good job there, but you can see Bolt there plowing through the Sisters, and they are getting mown down by handgun fire. So you can see just the faith, the gunpowder, the steel here, it's really winning out. Here in the center, my opponent did kind of pile through, but we kind of collapsed on him with all of our unbreakable units. So all these guys, although these guys will eventually, and probably pretty cost effectively, cleave through all of these troops, it's going to take them way too long. And in the meantime, the rest of the army is disintegrating. You can see my opponent did rout the Bright Wizard, so definitely a little bit of success there. My Outriders with grenade launchers routed off. You can see the Light Wizard here not really doing much of anything. But it's endgame. You can see the Sisters of Slaughter there, dead. Doomfire Warlocks shattered. This pocket of high-tier infantry getting pounded from all sides by Black Powder Fire. I net the Cannon Assassin, who, despite all of his buffs going off, is not going to be able to hold here. And you can see the handguns already lining up. He's at point blank. This is a terrible spot for him to be. You can see the missiles that are missing, hitting their own guys. Here's some friendly fire. But this Cannon Assassin is having a terrible day, and the crossfire from the handguns just doing too much work. Over here, the Dark Riders zoned off by handguns, and it's just brutal stuff, and that is going to be game here. There's still a second one up, so I do want to get to that. But this was a very rudimentary version of this comp. It was, now granted, my opponent here had a little bit of an odd build, and I will admit that. I did think this was potentially auto-generated. I don't know. It almost looks that way. At the same time, there are some choices in there that I feel mean it's for real. I don't know. It's hard to tell. It's not terrible enough in some ways for me to think it's auto-regenerated, but at the same time, some of those odd chevron choices and stuff like that do make me think so. So I'm not entirely sure, to be quite frank. If I was going for an anti-Empire build, this elite infantry is not really what you want to be going with. It's definitely more susceptible to the handgun spam. I would be going probably with Black Ark Corsairs or Sisters of Slaughter, backed by a few Doomfire Warlocks and some Cold One Knights, most likely, is really what I'd be going for against Empire nowadays. As far as I've been able to tell, that's one of the most successful sort of strategies against them. For my Lord, I'd probably bring either a Sorceress on a cheap mount, like the Steed or the Pegasus, maybe Malekith on his Raptor, but probably something like that. Regardless, as you can see, damage pretty evenly distributed. You can see the Tattersouls here. They were probably slaughtering spears, which is why they get their kills inflated. But for the rest of the troops, a very even distribution of damage. And yet, you can see just a total annihilation. 3, 4, 5 units were essentially wiped out to man. it's just brutal stuff what these handguns can do. And granted, I made some micro mistakes. Obviously, this comp, like I said, it's not ideal. Volkmar came in on his wagon with no banishment and no Jade Griffin, a double whammy of mess up. But it worked out, and you can see the loss is not too brutal. The front line, you can see one unit of flagellants basically eradicated, but everything else held okay, and the handguns were just doing work. So without further ado, we're actually going to hop into the second match, which I think is better. This was kind of like the foundation. This is where I got this idea, and we're kind of going to hop on over to a match that I actually think demonstrates this build in somewhat more competitive light. So this time around, we are on Lightseeker's Ford. Once again, the matchup Empire against Dark Elves. Well, this time around, I have managed to hone the composition a little bit, sort of revise it, and I actually had enough time to sort of set things up and arrange whatever units I wanted. So I had a more precise composition than what I had last time, which was kind of a haphazard, thrown together a mishmash of units. This time around, once again, we are rolling with Volkmar. I think Volkmar's actually a decent pick with this comp. Granted, he doesn't have the raw killing power of, say, Karl. He doesn't have the great debuffs from Boris, nor the quite the survivability, I don't think, of Boris Stodbringer. But he does bring still a decent amount of buffs. He's got that leadership buff, which can help if you need certain areas to hold. Obviously not with the front line, but elsewhere. He does dish out magic and fire damage, which is great against my opponent's potential use of sort of units with physical resist, which is really one of my main concerns here. And of course, between the buffs, Grand Hammer of Sigmar, Grand Shield of Faith, and Grand Soulfire, he's got some pretty good sort of improvements to make you just that little bit tankier. Now, of course, we are once again bringing the wizards, but because this build was a little more thought out, I put a little more time into this revised variant. Light Wizard, both the Light Wizard and the Bright Wizard do have Blast. They also both have Power Stones. Once again, those same spells, Net of Mintalk, as well as Burning Bolts, Burning Head, what is it? Piercing Bolts of Burning, there we go, Burning Head, Flaming Sword of Ruin, and Cascading Fire Cloak. So once again, looking to make use of these spells. I do understand that this is usually when I play, I would not recommend bringing 2 casters. I wouldn't recommend bringing more than, say, 2 or 3 spells. In this situation, though, with Dark Elves, there's a lot of toss-up, there's a lot of potential leeway here and there, and I think that honestly, for the price, you could get like 2 extra spearmen or something for the cost. But really, I think you're more better off just bringing 2 different casters and a few different spells. I think you're better off than, say, investing in an extra unit of spears. Especially because here my lines are pretty cost effective. You can see the front line once again unbreakable. We did cut a flagellant out, so still Sigmar's Son, still the Tattersouls, doubled up flagellants this time, and instead we do have 6 units of spears who are covering all angles. In the center, of course, once again, quad handguns, silver bullets, as well as the Outriders, who of course should be able to annihilate anything they face with raw firepower. That's important to keep in mind. These spears, if my opponent tries to kind of come in with light cav, I have a net. I've got 6 spears, so I can easily position, stretch out a line, prevent units such as these annoying Doomfire Warlocks from getting into the back line and disrupting my handguns. This was a flaw in my last composition where I just hadn't really invested in that much of backline defense. Now for my opponent's build, much more conventional comp. I should note that's why I actually have Volkmar. Well, that's part of the reason why I have Volkmar here on a horse rather than on his wagon. One, I figured I probably wasn't going to get that much use out of banishment, potentially, and that's really the only reason to bring his wagon. His wagon costs a lot of money, and it causes fear, terror, but unbreakable. But honestly, I think for this sort of flexible response that I want out of Volkmar, where I want him to be helping shut down Doomfire Warlocks and stuff, the chariot isn't that useful. Most of the killing power here is in the handguns, not in the melee. So really, I do think he's better off on a. It does save a lot of money. It's essentially buys me 2 extra spears, so I do think it's worthwhile. But for my opponent's build, Slashers, Harvesters, as well as Doomfire Warlocks, so that's something you see very often in this matchup. You can see here in the Heart of the Woods, my opponent did bring Marathi. She is mounted, actually she's not mounted, she's on foot. If she was mounted, she'd be on Sulafet. But she does have a good selection of spells. She's got Heart Render and Dark Sword, as well as Enchanting Beauty. Both very good debuffs, very strong. And this is actually another reason to bring handguns. Once again, Howls have a plethora of different melee attack debuffs. They've got a plethora of different abilities like this, or abilities that just let them overrun your front line, in which case that backline being more powerful, that firepower being more powerful, is going to pay for itself much more effectively than this sort of than a melee heavy front line, or even cavalry. Now my opponent's front line here, a bunch of Blackguard Corsairs, 2 Blackguard of Nagron, the Witch Elves, Hellbroni, as well as the Blades of the Blood Queen. So a very sort of melee heavy build. If my opponent gets into melee against me, though, he'll overrun me pretty easily. Probably crush through these flagellants with few losses, and really the main thing here is, can the handguns do the job, and that's really what we're looking to see. Obviously, had I brought, say, Outrider, or had I intended to sort of skirmish against this build, these Doomfire Warlocks will be able to sort of pressure those sorts of troops away. You can see they've got very good speed at 92, and with poison, your Outriders can't really escape, neither can Pistoliers once they get caught. So, regardless, we are sort of pushing in. You can see I'm moving Volkmar around. My opponent hit his whole army, and I didn't know where it was. And obviously I want to be cautious. Now, Dark Elves don't have any net spells, but nonetheless I don't want to sort of wander into the woods and suddenly have a horde of angry Dark Elves surging out against me. So after a while I kind of figured I didn't know where my opponent was hiding. I didn't realize he blobbed up a lot here in the woods. This actually came as a bit of a surprise once I actually ran into those guys. But regardless, this first about minute, it's just me posturing. I thought he might be here in the woods. Now, he does sally out here with the Slaanesh Harvester. I'm thinking, maybe he's trying to get a pick on me. I still hadn't spotted this before here, and I actually still wouldn't. As you can see, I'm fleeing back this way. My opponent actually keeps his cool. He doesn't sally out, which is probably a good move. Had he revealed it, I would have known immediately that he's got a blob here. I would have been more cautious in my approach here. What I kind of assumed at this point is that I'd skirted close enough to spot anything, and my opponent was probably camped out here in the corner. I was honestly a little disappointed, kind of angry that my opponent was probably camping in one of those woods back there, which was not the case. As you can see here, we are going to push forward. Now, I'm still being careful. I was hoping my opponent would get a little greedier with his Harvesters and his Doomfire Warlocks. He did not. He's playing it very smart and very safe here. But as we close on the distance, my opponent, I finally do light up these Blackheart Corsairs. You can see just how close my guys are. So immediately, you're going to see lines start pivoting. You can see the Sigmar Sons. I kick everything into quick speed. I'm rotating my whole line and moving to sort of halt my opponent's advance into me, and this is really looking pretty rough because I'm not prepared at all. You can see I've got these flagellates overextended. However, the handguns pivot, and you can see the Outrider fire just pouring in. Blackheart Corsairs getting decimated, and now a withering fire pouring in. The flagellates quickly rushing to close the gap. Sigmar Sons are in there. These handguns retreating. My opponent does open up here with a Soul Blight, so this isn't going to do very much for him. Now, it's going to debuff the Sigmar Sons. I'm not relying on these guys to do damage, though, so yeah, these guys will do a lot less damage. These guys do largely non-AP. They've got very little armor to begin with, but it doesn't really matter that much. These guys are just there to hold. So yeah, Soul Blight will help my opponent a little bit. Flagellants literally don't care. When they're losing, they actually get this ability, get an ability, Strength of the Pendant, that grants them somewhere in here. Strength of the Pendant that grants 14 melee defense as well as physical resist. But really, we don't care here. These guys are here to die essentially, so it doesn't really matter. Here in the flanks, you can see my opponent is trying to push this Blackguard through the line. Unfortunately, my opponent is about to get sort of a nice little cast here, a Pit of Shades. Not entirely sure if this was overcast or normal cast. Regardless, here in the pits, you can see Volkmar laying a bit of a beat down on these Doomfire Warlocks. Now, granted, he isn't raking in the most amount of kills, but he's doing some damage. I do finally pop my Battle Parage, which I should have done a while ago. Here in the back line, that Pit of Shades did some damage, but didn't kill anything, and you can see finally my opponent's lines. My opponent's already essentially, this game is essentially already over, even though it might not seem like it. Now, granted, my opponent still does have these Doomfire Warlocks. He's still got these guys over here who will disentangle from Volkmar eventually. But you know what? I still have Spears in reserve. I've still got Flagellants here who are not really doing anything. They're just mopping up these annoying Blackguard Corsairs who got shattered. My opponent at this point is bottled up. His Blackguard can't really push through. They might be able to shut down, say, the Silver Bullets, but they can't shut down my whole army. Ladies of the Blood Queen wasting their time chopping through spears. And keeps pouring the handgun fire. And now, granted, my opponent did get a little trapped here. You can see the Blackguard here pouring into the Silver Bullets. They're going to start chopping these guys down pretty good. They're definitely good enough to kill some handguns. But you can see I'm simply going to fall back. We're going to retreat here. We're going to shift our handguns. And there's still 1, 2, 3 handguns in a positions where they can fire if I retreat. And you can see here in the pits, I actually threw the Bright Wizard in on accident. Big mistake here, and you can see Marathi making him pay for it. But regardless, just an absolute slaughterhouse. I do think I missed bombardment there, unfortunately, but yeah, we did bombard these guys. We nuked them down a bit. You can see Volkmar pushing in, providing some AoE buffs. Grand Shield of Faith, of course, helping us keep these guys alive. And, you know, more Flagellants pouring into the breach to plug it up. These Hellbroni are trying to push into the back, but they're so low on HP. They're just not going to be able to hold up, and these Blackguard keep getting snagged by the spears, and just wave after wave of fire coming in from all these handguns. Now, my opponent does do a decent job here trying to breach the back line. He finally swings around, gets around through my spears, gets onto a unit of handguns, but at this point it's too little too late. Blades of the Blood Queen once again getting snagged on the spears. The handguns here just repositioning, retreating when they have to, and you can see the grenade fire just pouring in, decimating these Blackguard who just won't be able to hold. Now, Grand Marathi providing that boosted survivability, and I'm definitely overcommitting here with just how many Flagellants there are, but it's just too little too late. I do manage to net down these Slaanesh Harvesters. Probably should have tried to use an Overcast. I do believe I had the Winds of Magic for it, but you know, Slaanesh Harvesters, they're going the way to the dodo here. You can, the Silver Bullets, once they start firing, they've got magic damage. Volkmar's in here now, laying the whooping on these guys with his magical attacks. And these guys are having a rough time, and they're not really able to escape. And at this point, my opponent is actually going to decide to GG out, because really at this point he doesn't stand much of a chance. He's got one unit of the executioners, but otherwise, and he's got Marathi Halo up, but otherwise his army is essentially shattered. It's over, and that just shows the power of this build, I think. And you can see once again in the after battle screen, you can see several units brought to near annihilation, mostly by that handgunner fire. Interestingly enough, the Tattersalls raked in like 94 kills. I'm not entirely sure where they got those. Maybe they're better than I thought, but regardless, most of the damage there was definitely being done by the handguns, who were just pouring in the Outriders, of course, into that clump. And my opponent, sure, his troops were definitely doing disproportionate amounts of damage to my front line, but it just didn't matter. You can see 62 kills on that bombardment I missed, unfortunately. But this sort of elite build couldn't survive. And honestly, there's most of the Dark Elf builds will be pretty elite, even if you say Cease to Slaughter, even if you say see Doomfire Warlocks being brought in a greater number. You say ditch the Blades of the Blood Queen, ditch the Blackguard, try to bring some Sister of Slaughter. You're still going to see a very expensive composition. It's tough for the Dark Elves. They have to bring a pretty expensive composition, and breaching this much defense is really difficult for them. And so those handguns just unloading at the end game. My opponent, except for the Blades of the Blood Queen, really just didn't have the tools to push through. And at that point, these handguns will win. And you can see they still had 2 almost full spearmen left on the field. One of these flagellants still almost full. Even the Tattersoul is actually in decent shape. So that just shows how well these guys were holding. Volkmar himself basically full. So rough spot for my opponent, and definitely I think this shows that this build is pretty competitive. So if you're struggling against Dark Elves, if you're having a lot of issues, I do think this composition, I've had a few matches with it now, it's a decent pick. This sort of infantry heavy, very wide, lots of reserve heavy composition. If your opponent starts overrunning you, you have reserves. You've got extra spearmen, boatloads of them. You've got flagellants, you've got handguns, you've got silver bullets, you've got buffs from Volkmar to keep your line intact, you've got the Bright Wizard for buffs, you've got nets from the Light Wizard. You've got such a good composition against anything your opponent can bring. Even if they bring, say, what's her face? I can't even name her. Hellebron. She costs like 3,000, so you can just gun her down with mass handgun fire. Even if it's going to take a little while longer than usual, just because she's got that missile resist and physical resist, probably she's going to have the Blades of the Blood Queen. In the worst case, kill the Blades first, then kill Hellebron. You've got a lot of shooting. Use it. So regardless, good game to my opponent Eos here. Really chill guy. Had a lot of fun with this game. Had a lot of fun with both of these games. So I do hope you guys enjoyed the video. Hope you found it hopefully informative and helpful if you guys are having the same struggles I've been having with Empire against Dark Elves. If you have any comments, any criticism, if you'd like to say anything or share anything, be sure to mention it down in the comment section, and I'll respond as soon as I can. As usual, guys, I do appreciate the feedback. I know a lot of you guys are pretty active with responding to posts or to my videos, and I really do appreciate that. Comments, criticism, whether on the units used or the composition or how I can improve my videos, anything like that is appreciated. I do read them, guys, so I do appreciate any input. So, with that said, guys, I do appreciate you all for watching, and I hope to see you all in the next one. Wyvern out.